I guess I was fairly apprehensive the whole time that I was flying in combat. And I guess there's good reason to feel that way. I'm there to cause a lot of damage and a lot of harm, and therefore they would like to damage me. And I was 25 years old at that time. Top Gun was really a thrill. I must have done well in actual combat because at the time I was just a lieutenant junior grade, which is a first lieutenant in the Air Force. And so I may have been the very first lieutenant junior grade to go through Top Gun. That was the dream of a lifetime come true. I had wanted to be an aeronautical engineer and a test pilot just like my dad from the time I was 10 years old. STS-27 was my third launch, and it was only the second launch after the Challenger accident. Well, I will never forget, we maneuvered the arm, and Mike Mullane was my arm operator, so he moved the arm over there, and we brought up the television image of the right wing, and I looked at what I was seeing, and I said to myself, we are gonna die. To be an airline pilot, there was mandatory age 60 retirement. I was a NASA astronaut until I was 50 years old. And so I looked at the situation, and I had known a number of Southwest airline pilots. And they were just like me. They were flying because they loved to fly. Well, there's a lot of piloting that goes into it, a tremendous amount of piloting that goes into it, because you're going to wind up passing other airplanes. You're going to get in a duel with another airplane that's fairly closely matched. So there's a ton of satisfaction from doing that. And hey, let's just talk about the racing itself. It's fun to fly low, but it's dangerous.
Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to Warbirds in Review 010. You know what? This is just a wonderful venue here, the Scott's Warbird Alley. Let's thank again Mr. Jim Hagedorn for this. The subject of today's program is Little Margaret behind me here. It looks like a P-51, doesn't it? It's not. It's an F-6. And the owner of the F-6 here today with me is Butch Schroeder. He restored this beautiful airplane, and it's a great story. You're going to love it. We're going to talk to Butch at length. And next to Butch is the original pilot of Little Margaret. Watch your head. This is Colonel Clyde East. Welcome, these guys. Butch, this is the old story about the airplane in the barn. You know, you just happen up on it, and there it is. So 1980, you find Little Margaret in a barn or a garage.
That is correct. In 1980, we found this airplane completely disassembled in a household garage in St. Louis, Missouri. And the airplane had not flown since 1949. So the stories are true, you know, the car in the barn or whatever you happen to look for. You never want to dispel those rumors. The man that had the airplane originally got it in California. The airplane was disassembled, set in this man's backyard, and it was his children's gymnasium. And he refused to sell the airplane until his children were, raised and gone. And the man that I bought it from bought it. He lived in California, he lived in St. Louis, he lived in New York, and the airplane always traveled with him. So when we finally got a hold of the airplane, it was in St. Louis. We took 6 pickup trucks and 4 car trailers, hauled the airplane home. We spent on and off 12 years restoring the airplane. And I think we brought it up here in 1992 for its first time. And we had it judged, and we won Grand Champion Warbird in 1992.
This thing is detailed down to the cameras. Am I correct?
That is correct. It still has one of the original photo reconnaissance cameras back in the fuselage. To our knowledge, there was 136 of these aircraft built at the factory. And to our knowledge, this is the only one left in the world in its original condition. And as he had said, most everybody knows that they're P-51 Mustangs, but actually this is an F6D.
Yeah, it's a little bit different. It looks like a Mustang from the outside, except for the camera ports. And talk a little bit about the role of the recce airplane.
The Mustang, I believe if I'm correct in saying, was the only fighter that could take pictures and shoot back. I think the P-38s, they put the cameras in the nose, removed the guns, so in turn they could not fight. But we were researching the history of the airplane. We found out, what original squadron that it flew in, and we were trying to find out, what the actual colors were. The only thing that we were able to find was black and white photographs of the airplane. And a friend of ours was out in the fly market, came across an artist rendition of Mr. East's airplane. And I asked the person selling, are the colors correct? And he says, if you'd like to, you can just call the pilot, and he'll be glad to talk to you. So that was my first contact with Mr. East approximately 20 years ago. And I called him up, introduced myself to him, never knew him, had never heard of the man, and asked him, if it would be okay if we painted our airplane to represent the one that he flew in World War II. his comment was, "I'd love to." And it started a wonderful relationship over the 20 years that we've known each other. We've had the airplane at several different occasions where he's held his squadron reunions. I think the most memorable one for me was they were having a reunion at Fort Knox, Kentucky, and I received permission to fly in there and put the airplane on display. And this was the first time that I met his wife, whom the airplane is named after. And I was there before the group come out, and I watched this little lady, come hustling across the ramp, and she found this man that was standing there in uniform, and she must have thought that that was the pilot. And she run up to him, gave him a great big hug, and he says, "No, I'm not the pilot. He's standing over there." And so she come run across the ramp, grabs a hold of me, and it's really wonderful to be able to meet these people.
Thank you, Butch. I just met Colonel East this morning, and he gave me permission to call him Clyde, and that's a real honor. But I'd like you to meet my new friend, Clyde East.
Thank you very much. It's so nice to be here, my second visit to Oshkosh, and it's even better than last time.
Clyde, sit down where it's comfortable. You don't have to stand in the sun.
Okay.
I appreciate that gesture, but it's too hot to be standing up all day long. Let's talk a little bit about your training. You went to the RCAF in Canada, and talk about the training process.
Well, I joined the Canadian Air Force in 1941, in as much as I was below age to qualify for the U.S. Air Force or the Navy. And a friend and I had promised we would go to Canada together and be pilots. That, of course, was about the fastest way that you could get your wings in those days, because the Canadians had a short course there. They needed pilots very badly in England because the Battle of Britain was on at that time when we began the discussion. But it stretched out, and finally I told him to heck with it. I'm leaving whether you go or not. So I went to Canada in June of '41. And they accepted me with open arms, as they had some 4,000 other people from the States that went up expecting to participate or study to be members of the aircrew.
Which airplanes did you train in Canada?
Well, I trained in the Fleet Finch and also the Tiger Moth and the Harvard. The Harvard might be a little doubtful to some of you, but it was a T6, which was the standard trainer worldwide generally for the Allied forces. And it must have trained 10,000, 20,000 pilots during the 3 or 4 years it was in the war. But I got my wings from the Canadians for flying the Harvard, and was fortunately for me, I was sent to England as a fighter pilot trainee, which was something that a few years before I thought would be absolutely impossible.
Colonel East is the leading reconnaissance ace of our country with 13 victories. It's very unusual for a reconnaissance pilot to even see a victory or see an enemy aircraft, and to get a victory was very unusual. So how did you do that? You must have planned that.
Well, I consider it luck because there may have been other pilots in the air with the opportunity, but I considered my position was one that if I happened to shoot down an airplane while I was on a reconnaissance mission, nobody was hurt but the other airplane. And consequently, after a short time, that happened over and over. So there were certain levels of command that swore that I couldn't possibly be doing a proper reconnaissance after I had 10 or 12 victories. Well, I did not argue the situation, but we got a rule that you could not engage another aircraft unless he engaged you first. Well, being 100 or 200 miles from headquarters, it was my story. So from that point on, they all came at me out of the sun, and I responded in a dogfight, and nobody could say anything about that. Another reason that I obviously had better chances than anyone else was that I was a flight commander, and my scheduling my flight allowed me to pick the missions that I considered would give me the best chance of doing a good recce and also maybe seeing an airplane or two on the way.
Well, you had photographic evidence that you were doing your job. You not only photographed the results of the bombing or whatever on the ground, but you had photographic evidence of the kills, right?
In many cases I did, yes. And that is the source of the picture that you were mentioning a few minutes ago that Butch was mentioning that he had seen, that I had shot down a German light bomber, and he had bedded in at an onion patch. And I went over and took a picture of him, and that was the subject of a painting that Mr. Mike Machot had done, and that's how that particular photo print came out.
What a beautiful sound. Nothing like a Mustang, is it? Let's move on a little bit, and then we want to come back to World War II in a few minutes. But after World War II, of course, Korea. And you went to Korea again as a recce pilot, and this time you're flying the P-80, right?
That's right. It was a P-80, except it was equipped with cameras. It had no weapon. And consequently, with a nose full of cameras, I flew a full tour in the RF-80, as we called it. And after I had finished that tour, there was a call for Mustang pilots because they were activating a recce squadron with Mustangs, and they wanted experienced pilots to participate in that reaction of a new squadron. And so I was called up, and I became the operations officer. And of course, I didn't have much choice as far as air-to-air was concerned, because in Korea, we were kept very close to the bomb line or the front line of our own troops. And consequently, there was enough up there to keep everybody busy. And I flew something over 100 missions in the Mustang in Korea, and I never saw an enemy airplane.
Wow. Moving on, after Korea, you were involved in the Cuban Missile Crisis, which was 1962. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Well, we had a briefing several weeks before the crisis exerted itself. And I had been sent up to our headquarters to discuss ways that a RF-80, RF-101 could take pictures of missile sites, which they had evidence was being erected in Cuba. This was sometime in early October, and we spent several days working up missions to cover those, but we already knew what they were because we had the beautiful airplane called the U-2 that had mapped the entire island, and the great PIs that we had at the time, those are photo interpreters, had suggested exactly where they were tearing up the dirt to put in these missiles. So we had our targets set up for us, and we planned missions to each and every target that had been erected.
Butch, I know that since you restored this aircraft, you've had the opportunity to meet so many people involved in not only the reconnaissance business, but fighter pilots. What has this airplane taught you?
I guess if anything that it has taught me is the great respect that our veterans deserve.
Amen. With that in mind, how many veterans in the audience? Raise your hands. Be recognized. Thank you so much for your service. Let's get back to World War II just a second here. We were talking in the tent before about all the people you have met, Clyde, and one of them was my friend Gunther Rahl. What a wonderful guy he was.
Well, Gunther was, in my opinion, probably the finest fighter pilot that the Luftwaffe had. Certainly one of the finest. And he turned out to be one of the nicest gentlemen that I had ever met. And I admired him so greatly, but he was not the only one. There were several German pilots that I had the pleasure of meeting after the war, and it was not at all difficult for me to change my opinion of those guys that I was so anxious to shoot down back a couple of 3-4 years before. And they suddenly became people that I greatly admired, because they were all the ones that I met were just the nicest, most interesting people. They held no bad feelings toward us, and we held none toward them. And I met, I guess, at least a half dozen of their top fighter pilots. And I must say that they were truly great men, and of the whole bunch, I would say that Gunther Rahl, whom we discussed for a few minutes, was probably not only one of the best pilots, but he was one of the nicest gentlemen I've ever met.
I agree. The sound of freedom. Last year here, right here, I interviewed Gunther. I know it was the last English interview, and maybe the last interview of him, and he passed on a couple of months later, but he was truly a gentleman, and we miss him a lot. But I'd like to get back to Butch a little bit. Let's talk about the restoration process, not so much in money, but in time and effort and what's involved in restoring. You restored several airplanes, including the P-47 and this aircraft, but what's involved as far as time and finding parts, and can you talk a little bit about that?
The Mustang is probably one of the more easier airplanes to do because there's several individuals that manufacture new parts. I mean, they almost have the capability of now building brand new Mustangs. We spent off and on 12 years working on the airplane. I had a bunch of friends helping me, had a couple gentlemen working with me. It was kind of an on-again, off-again project. We never kept track of the dollars or the man-hours that were spent on it. I think that I was blessed, having a lot of good people helping me. And, two of the guys, the main guys that work for me now have their own business in our hometown that have turned out probably of half a dozen, top-notch restorations. One of them is out on the flight line today being judged. The one is called Live Bait, who is a friend of Clyde's. And the Warbird community is so small, and there are just so many wonderful people out that are willing to help you. On this airplane here, we were just working out of a T-hangar. We basically did everything to restore the airplane in-house, except the engine, propeller, and the instruments. Everything else we pretty much did ourselves. Prior to doing this airplane, we had restored a T6. The P-47, it was kind of I wouldn't refer to it as a total restoration, but it's just something that I enjoy doing. And maybe I should put a warning out there that all started with cars. And today I'm kind of going back to working on cars again. I just really love, doing this. I mean, it represents a piece of history. When we got the airplane, our sole intention was to try to restore it back to the way it looked the day that it rolled out of the factory. At that time, there was only a few that had been done that way, and you have to remember this airplane was finished, 18 years ago? Yeah. So with time and flying time, it's starting to show its age, but it wasn't through the help of friends and family of mine trying to keep this thing clean and going. I probably couldn't do it by myself.
Clyde, earlier this week we had Christina Oles here, General Robin Oles' daughter, and she's written a wonderful book, actually his memoirs, and it's Fighter Pilot, and it's available over there also. But you worked with Robin Oles. Can you talk about your relationship with him?
Well, the first jet squadron that I joined back in July of 1946, Major Olds at that time was the operations officer. And he made certain that every pilot that was checked out knew the airplane and was quite capable in it. And that's where I learned that he was a very special person in many ways. But I worked for him roughly for 2.5 years after that. And I have nothing but admiration for the gentleman that was a major when I knew him, but a general when I last saw him just a short time ago. And I might add something else to Butch's story, is that this particular airplane that's behind me is exactly the configuration that a World War II airplane was. Most of the Mustangs that you see on the ground here have been modified all over the place. They've changed so many things on it. But Butch was absolutely amazing in that he found out exactly what was in the original and made sure that it went into the airplane that he was working on. And that, I think, is one of the amazing things about Little Margaret.
Where did the name come from, Little Margaret?
Well, Little Margaret was my Canadian girlfriend that I met less than a month after I joined the Canadian Air Force. because I knew her brother rather well. And sometime after the invasion of 1944, the Normandy invasion, I was sent home on a 30-day R&R, that is rest and recuperation. I had quite a bit of combat time and had been overseas quite a while as compared to most of the other U.S. Air Force pilots. And so I was sent home. Well, the first thing I did was marry my dear sweetheart. And I had named my Canadian airplane Margaret at the beginning. When I transferred to the American Air Force, I named the second one Little Margaret, and then the third one, and then the fourth one. Fortunately, the second airplane that I named in the USAF was shot down. So when I got my Mustang D, I put the name up and it stayed there, and it lived through the war. I would imagine that it flew at least 700-800 missions over the period that we had the airplane. But of course, I was very fortunate to get a chance to fly the airplane that had my name on it. It doesn't mean a thing in a squadron. When your name is on an airplane, you're just lucky if you get to fly it.
We're going to finish up here in a few minutes, but before I do, we got time for a couple of questions, so be thinking about your questions. Colonel East is going to be over here in the Warbirds gift shop area in the far right-hand corner for autographs after we finish up. So right now, does anybody in the audience have a question for Colonel East or for Butch? If so, John's got a microphone right here. Anybody have a question?
Well, then you got your picture taken.
Butch, you said that you have little Margaret home, but you didn't tell us where home is for you. You told us where she was, St. Louis, California, all over the place. And then you said you took her home. Where are you from?
Well, I am from Virginia. Little Margaret was born and raised in Hamilton, Ontario, Canada. And I met her in Canada, loved her in Canada, married her in Canada.
Anybody else have a question?
Just a quick response to the lady. I'm from a small town in Illinois called Danville. I'm the third generation to be born and raised there.
What's the difference between an an F6 and a P-51?
There's basically no difference other than the fact that the F6, which this is been equipped with photo reconnaissance cameras.
He's coming.
Question for you, Colonel. Were you based out of England and flying over Germany? And if so, what was it like navigating back to your home base through that wonderful England weather?
Where were you based in England?
I was always, fortunately, after I became operationally ready and could fly combat, I was fortunately in southern England, which was a very short distance from France, Germany, France, Belgium, and Holland. And that was where most of my missions went into when I was flying out of England. But of course, once we got into Europe, you only came back to your regular base. I'm not sure that answers your question.
Yeah, he asked about the wonderful English weather. How did you navigate?
It was a sort of hit and miss as compared to the situation here today. you could head back and call your tower and ask them what the weather is. That was always the first question. And if he said it was, something like 301, which means 300 feet visibility and 1 mile, 300 feet ceiling and 1 mile visibility, that meant you were going to have to take a chance if you wanted to land there. Normally, you'd go somewhere else. But British weather was always a problem, and unfortunately, a lot of people were wrecked airplanes and themselves in trying to get into bases that were closed in. But sometimes there was no choice. You had to bail out and just leave the airplane in order to survive.
Anybody else?
Yes. How do you compare the flight capabilities of the German airplanes and the skill of the pilots compared to the Mustangs?
Well, my answer to that is that after I had gone through my training program and had received the training that was given the normal fighter pilot, although I was assigned to a reconnaissance squadron, I was fairly competent. But when you think of the German Air Force at that time, with the Mustangs flying regularly, they were wiping out the best blood of the German Air Force. And consequently, most of the pilots that I ran up against, they were not very capable. And consequently, with a Mustang, which is a better airplane than they had, I could get all over them without any problem. And they knew it. A lot of the German pilots, when they would see a Mustang coming in on them, would belly in because they knew that they didn't stand a chance.
It's common knowledge at the end of the war that the Germans were producing more airplanes than they had pilots available. They had a great capacity right up to the end of the war. Anybody else have a question?
Colonel East, I have one question. When you were flying in Europe during World War II, were your reconnaissance missions flown as a flight or solo?
We had a flight of two. The leader had the responsibility for doing the reconnaissance. And he looked at the ground and attempted to do the best job he could of seeking out those things that were important to the ground forces. And the number two guy, he was on the wing, and he was supposed to look out for airplane. And consequently, it was not any question. I always picked the guy with the best eyes to fly with me.
We're going to end up now. I want to thank you all for showing up today and watching Warbirds in Review. We'll see you back here at 10 o'clock in the morning, same time, same place. Again, I want to thank my friends, my new friend, Colonel Clyde East, and our old friend, Butch Schroeder.
Thank you.
Great. You're go ahead.